the evenings on WCPT 820 Chicago's Progressive Talk. In the nighttime hours, 11:50 a.m. KKNW in Seattle, and live in Minneapolis, St. Paul on AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. It's the Matt McNeil Show for your Friday. Good to have you with us today. Joining me right now is the author Anna Farro Henderson. Core Samples is her brand new book, a climate scientist experiments in politics and motherhood, and she's kind enough to join us today to talk about this book. Hi, Anna. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
Thank you very much for having me. Congratulations. Now, you've been an award-winning writer. You are, I'm going to read this here, an award-winning writer, PhD scientist, environmental policy expert. She's a fellow at the Institute of Environment at the University of Minnesota, teaches at the Loft Literary Center, and works in climate advocacy. You've written a lot of things that have been awarded. Is this your first book?
This is my first book.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I know authors. I know people who've written books. That's a big freaking deal, man. You've written a book. That's amazing.
It's a big deal. It's huge. It's like I'm learning so many things about writing a book and putting it into the world, and how much more it is than just writing.
And you obviously this book touches on a lot of things. You talk on science. You talk about the science interacting in politics. And you talk about being a mother, which I think is one of the most relatable things. My wife as well, she is a professional, has been a mother and stuff like this. And you talk about these struggles. At what point did you say, you know what, I might be able to intertwine all this and turn it into a book?
The writing really started way before I had any inkling that this was a book. So it was just a practice for me to be writing. So when I was a scientist and I'd be out in remote wilderness collecting samples, like often kind of like living out there, camping out, and I would write about the science that we were doing, the samples we were collecting, the GPS locations from the front to the back in my field notebook, and then from the back to the front I would write poetry, and I would basically do the equivalent of sketching scenes but with words. And there was no point to it. I definitely wasn't like, and one day this will be a book. I was just doing it because it's kind of intense when you're like living on a glacier for 2 months, or you're living above tree line, or you've hiked into a place to collect samples. You don't know what's going to happen. You might run into like a moose with its baby or a bear, and and all those things definitely happened. And so I would write. And when I got to politics, I was so clueless. Like, I'd been trained as a scientist. I'd only worked in academics, really. And then suddenly I was in Al Franken's office working on energy and environment policy. I was 6 months pregnant with my second kid. And we had these awesome notebooks that had huge margins. And so I would write my impressions the way I had done in science. Like, it was like being on a remote field expedition, just the US Senate. And I would write myself just whatever it was I was noticing. And then after maternity leave, and I came back and I was pumping milk for my baby for about 9 months. And I kept a little notebook I had to have this giant bag with all this paraphernalia for pumping milk. And I kept a little notebook in there and I would write in it. And so again, none of that was to write a book. It was just to figure out what the hell I was doing.
One of the things that I like is you are an unapologetic, happy scientist. You love science. I'm going to read a paragraph here. Now, I don't want to necessarily spend too much. I want people to buy this book because this is a very good read. But I'm going to read this because you have to understand how much she likes science, which I think for what adds credibility and personability to your book is that element. I take the raw data from running samples of mud through instruments in a laboratory. The data ordered by depth converted to time. I can't smell the trees or feel the sun, but thousands of years of time flow through my mind, and I see the retreating ice sheets, growing and shrinking lakes, the march of deciduous trees northward. I'm no longer held to my dusty university office, not pinned to the present moment. This is time unobserved. The lover baking bread to send in the mail, hands kneading the dough, yeast brewing and pushing the wet mound up and up. That is just the way you describe it. I mean, I've got a son who's into numbers, and he works as an actuary, and you just get people that are into this sort of thing, and for them, I think it's for a lot of people, they hear science and it's like, oh, turn off my mind. But the reality is you just make it so relatable there, because it's like, no, you just really love science, and this is a lot of fun for you.
It is fun. And so just, I have to ask you, Matt, like, so when you're reading about science in the book, you're not bored and you're not like, man, this is
Oh
esoteric.
no, my son picked it up from me. I do like sciencey things, and I mean, I like, there are books like 6 Degrees and stuff like that. I don't have any problem like this. I'm not a big fan of like Tom Clancy. I mean, that dude gets a little wordy, but at the same time, it is, I am the kind of guy that loves history, and I do like numbers, and I do like science that can be conveyed across in a very relatable way, because once again, you are the expert on the science. I don't know. I am of the mindset that you're the scientist. I don't, because I read a blog someplace, I'm becoming smarter than you. And so you're the expert. And so for you to be able to take a complicated and scientific, unapologetically science thing and make it relatable, that's good writing. That just is good writing. And it shows why, because of that paragraph where this is just, I love doing this and this is who I am.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
You touched on getting into politics. How did that happen? Was it something they called your office, or was it people that you knew? How did you make that jump from being really in the scientific world to going into the political world?
So I had no background in politics. I'd never done anything, like not an internship. My dad is a Canadian citizen. He wasn't voting. Like we weren't talking about it at dinner. So I wasn't like a predictable candidate to go into working for an elected official. But I had been studying climate science, and that was what I planned to do with my life. And as I got deeper into the work, it got more and more into organic geochemistry tools, which were very laboratory based, which is as boring as it sounds. I mean, the science is awesome, like the results are awesome, but the work was super boring. I wasn't out in the mountains. And those tools I was using were really valuable to oil and gas companies. Mm-hmm. So I started being recruited by oil and gas companies. And it was like, what is going on? Like, I'm a climate scientist and I'm going to go work for an oil and gas company. Like, it seemed like the darkest turn that my life could take.
Pro glacier.
Like, melt the glacier and let's go for it. And things were, it was pretty soon after the 2008 economic downturn, and jobs were just not there. I was seeing awesome scientists just moving around the country, living grant to grant. And it was like, I had a kid. I wanted to have a life. I needed to have health insurance. And so I thought, this isn't actually logical, so here I am, a scientist. I'm going to tell you something really irrational. But I thought, if I'm qualified to work in oil and gas, maybe I could work in clean energy, which is not necessarily organic geochemistry based. And there's a fellowship program to bring scientists into government. So I applied and I got one of these fellowships, and there were no strings attached. Like, I could work for anybody from any party on any topic. And I knew I wanted to work for somebody who was really bold on climate change. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Senator Franken was the chair of the subcommittee on energy and natural resource. So that was one of my top picks. And I also kind of thought I wanted to move back to Minnesota because I really had loved it.
So, well, and so you this happens. And I guess what's interesting today is that's just, it's almost like a time capsule, that story itself, because today science is not exactly, especially with a portion of the political world, I'll leave you out of what I do every day, but in the portion of what in the political world that's out there, scientists aren't looked upon with respect and honor, and we need more scientists in the room. No, it's more about, we need more people that are of the same mindset of I am, so when I go out and scream my opinion as a fact, it can be validated. And the reality is that there are a lot of people like yourself, I imagine, that go in there, and the fact that you decided on a morality scale is like, the oil and gas, I'm going to go to, I mean, it's not the best, but it still is better than deep fracking. I'm good with that.
I was working on fracking. That was one of the things I got to work on. So actually, I got to the Senate and I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't know anything. But then within a couple days, I was like, I was made for this. Mm-hmm. Like, I was born to work here, both from a personality standpoint and everything was technical. So there was all this stuff going on with federal fracking rules. Mm-hmm. And you know what fracking is about? Organic chemistry and geology. It was great. Everything we did had tied back to chemistry and physics and geology. All the mining issues in Minnesota were blowing up. Again, like, geologic issue. So things were more relevant. Like my skills were a lot more relevant than I had anticipated. And things I hadn't been using, like my personality, was suddenly a lot more relevant than it had been in science. And, I would say this thing about like science, we all know science is super important, right? Like if we get sick, we want medical care, and that medical care comes from science. And we all love our technology, and we're relying on technology to like save us. But yeah, there's kind of a war on science. There's a lot of distrust in science. And the question I think I'm asking in this book is really, can we make science relatable? Can we make it fun? Can we make it playful? Can we make it human and something that we feel like belongs to us and we're participating in if we tell stories about it? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really like the goal of this book, is to try to humanize what's happening in science and to humanize what's happening in politics.
Well, and that brings me to the point about your motherhood, which you bring into the story as well, which is, because it is kind of interesting. You think of scientists, and you think of politicians, and then you think of motherhood. And those three things generally are not, I don't think a lot of people, even though obviously it does, it's not things that necessarily people think cohabitate the same individual within any given time. And I think that you by talk a little bit about that, because obviously you're dealing with the science community, you're dealing with politicians and trying to make a difference there, and then also obviously being a mom and just in the slings and arrows that get accompanied with that element of any professional mother on this planet.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So for this thing of trying to be playful and humanized, so when I write about my experience working for Al Franken, the frame of it is pumping milk in the U.S. Senate. And I'm writing about it as structured as a lactation diary, which is based on the real one that I kept. And that was a really intentional choice to bring people in that way, because who has ever written about Al Franken from the context of pumping milk? and it's not expected. But yeah, it was challenging being a mom. So it was really different in science and in politics. In science, people would come up to me, people I knew, my colleagues or my mentors, and they'd say things like, a woman only needs 7 days after she gives birth before she comes back to work. Like that's what, female professors were telling me. Like, thank you.
Oh,
great.
Really? You can walk off that car wreck. Go for it there. Just leg it out a little bit. You'll be fine.
Or I'd get questions like a grad student who's, like somebody in their 20s or 30s, like they're a grown adult, and they'd come up and say, that's a parasite, don't you? And then they'd be like, can I touch your belly? Like, no. Or like, are you breastfeeding? Ew. So that was like, there was some of that going on in science. People were really like, what are you doing? Like, congratulations. Did you mean to do that? Like, yeah, I'm a 30-year-old scientist and I had no idea how you get pregnant.
That sounds good. Yeah.
It's like, so then when I went into politics, it was completely different. So, just for kind of context setting, in science, when you dress up, you wear like outdoor wear. Like you're in like REI camp clothing. In politics, when you dress up, you've got like a manicure and makeup and heels and pantyhose and a dress. And so when I went into politics, like it's just such a different thing. When I interviewed in Al Franken's office, I was pretty pregnant looking. And it was all in front. It was really obvious. I didn't sit behind a table. I was in a chair. My pregnant belly was right out there. And you know what? Nobody noticed. Like
no one was coming up to try to lay their hands on your belly at that point.
No. Well, and when the chief of staff called me to offer me the job, I said, this didn't come up in the interview, but just checking in, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby and I need to take 3 months off in January. And she said, oh, no one mentioned that. Totally fine. So I was like, whoa, they like really, like literally like pregnant woman walks in. The interview was like an oral exam. It was this like rapid fire, super intense.
Can I step in really quick? Can you stick around for a few minutes here? I'd like to talk to you a little bit more after the break. Anna Farro Henderson is joining us. Core Samples, A Client Scientist's Experiments with Politics and Motherhood is the book. We are going to take a break. We will come on back. It is the Matt McNeil Show here on your Friday. It's the Matt McNeil Show on a Friday. Anna Farro Henderson is joining us. The book is Core Samples of Client Scientist Experiments in Politics and Motherhood. And she's kind enough to join us today to talk about this book a little bit longer today. One of the things that you kind of talk a little bit about the flaws in the systems that are out there a little bit. Why don't you touch on that a little bit, if you can?
Yeah, there's just a few flaws, just a couple small ones.
I know about 18 or 19 on me right now, but I mean, no, sure. Let's talk about the whole systems.
Yeah. So should I focus on politics or on science?
You know what? The truth, I want you to do it on science because when you described motherhood with scientists, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a train wreck. You know, and so I mean, you know, you have obviously a lot of experience with motherhood, with politics, but the science. I mean, if you're seeing flaws there, I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things about earth science, like the field that I came from, is how undiverse it is. Okay. So I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to urban and inner city schools that were like, you know, majority kids of color. And then being in earth science departments, it was like, where did everybody go? Like what happened? And like, how could the way the earth works, the rocks, like how could this not be deeply interesting to people from different cultures and ethnic backgrounds and races? And I think that's a legacy of geology being kind of like a male field. I didn't hang out in the geology department that much as an undergrad, and so I was a little bit surprised when I got to grad school and I was like, wait, this is kind of like a frat or something. I mean, really, really fun people, really awesome, great guys, but it was like big guys who drink a lot. And when we were on field expeditions, like when I was collecting samples for my PhD, it's such a great communal thing. You go on field expeditions with different people, you work like 14-hour days or you work 24 hours, whatever, you work without stopping, you do whatever you need to do to get the samples, you help each other, no one's getting paid extra for it. So a group of people came with me out to Colorado to collect samples. And I realized really quickly that we were going to have to make trips to town to buy booze because we were going through it really quickly. And that was essential. Like I had this team of unpaid people working really hard, and if we're going to make it, we had to have alcohol. So, you know, there's a certain culture to every field, and the culture of geology is a particular one that like it's been kind of a narrow slice of humanity. And I think it's changing. It's changing all the time, but there's a lot of room for other types of questions. So I'd say like a flaw in science is that when you do science, you're objective, right? Mm-hmm. You have an objective question, you figure out this way to approach the scientific method, to look at things, to find out more information, you're building knowledge. But those questions that are getting asked are not objective, right? They are based on our cultural and social values and perspectives. So if you have a narrow set of people asking questions, there's like a whole lot of stuff that just isn't getting examined. So I think that's one of the like high level flaws.
You are really good at this. You know, like I mean, and I say that not as any kind of authority. Like, wow, that was good. You know, that was like your way to that you drive through. And once again, and by the way, first of all, lived in Wickford, lived in East Greenwich. So you and we can go get a Gabner and a grinder sometime. But
and you probably got more snow days than me.
Oh, down on the coast there. Oh, yeah, it was good. I had to have the Cranston nasal wine removed, but no, these are Rhode Island jokes. These are Rhode Island jokes.
The accent?
It was wicked bad for a while. Anyway, we've devolved. Anyway, but I want to congratulate you on this book. This is fantastic. It is your ability to be able to ride the line, and I think a lot of it is as everyone just heard. Personal stories, personal perspective is something that I think a lot of times gets missed, and that is what helps create this and bringing in the connection of the three: the science, the politics, and motherhood. You do a great job with this. It's a highly recommended book by me, people. Core Samples, The Climate Scientist Experiments in Politics and Motherhood. Anna Farro Henderson, go find this. This is a read you want to enjoy. Anna, anytime you want to come back, enlighten me on any subject, by all means, please, I'd love to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'd love to be here anytime.
All righty. Thanks, Anna. Anna Farro Henderson.
Thank you.
Once again, the book is Core Samples, a Client Scientist Experiment in Politics and Motherhood. Kind enough to join us today. We will, let me, before we get out of the hour here, let me go into one or two other quick things, just real quick if I can. Because I did want to, there was one story that just, a Halloween parade in Western Pennsylvania featured a float that depicted Donald Trump riding a golf cart and Kamala Harris wearing shackles being dragged behind her. Behind him, rather, I should say. A video of the parade in Mount Pleasant shows a man wearing a Trump mask riding in a cart, surrounded by people dressed as Secret Service agents, and riding on top of the vehicle was a fake sniper with somebody dressed as the vice president being led behind in chains. The worst part of it, there was either rope or chain attached to the back of the vehicle, and said Mayor Diane Bailey, and there was a woman who resembled Kamala Harris in handcuffs and chained to the back of the vehicle, although as though they were dragging her. The Democratic mayor isn't sure how the float was approved to take part in the annual parade, and she's meeting with the borough manager and the council president to discuss the matter. Right now, we're just trying to do damage control the best we can, but after it's already done, I'm not sure there's much we can do address going forward. The parade is sponsored by the Volunteer Fire Department, which released a statement apologizing for the offensive display. We do not share the values represented by those participants, and we understand how it may have hurt or offended members of the community. The statement read, "We're proud to have sponsored this parade for 70 years. We are committed to learning from this experience and ensuring the future events celebrate the diversity and spirit of community in a positive way. It remains unclear who is involved with the display." Well, clearly the Volunteer Fire Department knew about it. Westmoreland County Republican Committee Chair Bill Bretz told the TV station he did not approve of the float. "We certainly don't condone the simulation of political imprisonment and violence in any context in any matter of party affiliation of those involved." I can tell you this right now. The people involved in this, they are going to be known. The people that did this, people are going to know who did this. And so the question then comes down to, are we going to find out the names of the people who did this? And should they be hounded a little bit and made to explain why exactly they did this? I would hope so. I would hope so, because that's really freaking offensive. All right. Daylight savings time, once again, is on Sunday morning. You've been advised. Chicago, Seattle, have a good one. Minneapolis, St. Paul, hour 2 up next.